The water had turned brown again. Ilara pressed her cracked lips together and watched the trickle seep through the stone wall, pooling in the groove she had carved with her fingernail over the past 3 months. 3 months? She knew because she had been counting the guard rotations, and the guards at Ironmore Keep changed shifts every 8 hours, and she had counted 270 shift changes. The math kept her sane, the math and the fluttering beneath her ribs that had started 5 weeks ago, a sensation like a moth trapped under her skin. She cupped her hands beneath the trickle and caught enough to wet her tongue. It tasted of copper and limestone. She had been a field medic before, all of this attached to the Greymore border patrols trained to suture wounds with fishing line and pack arrow punctures with yarrow poultice. She knew what her body needed: protein, iron, folic acid, things that did not exist in stale bread crusts and brown water. The baby kicked again. Twice this time. She pressed her palm flat against the swell of her belly, feeling the movement roll beneath skin, stretched tight over bones that had become too prominent. She did not know his name. The father. She had known it once, she supposed, at the autumn summit, when Greymore's soldiers had been temporarily stationed alongside warriors from a dozen packs for the ceasefire negotiations. But the details of that night were fogged by grief and cedar wine, and the man's face had dissolved into a blur of broad shoulders and a voice so low it had vibrated in her sternum. What she remembered clearly was the smell: pine resin, black tea, something metallic like the air before a lightning strike. She remembered waking alone on a bedroll that smelled like him, her wolf whimpering beneath her skin in a way she had never felt before and had not felt since. 8 days later, Greymore fell, not to the enemy, to itself. Alpha Tyrell had discovered the pregnancy before Ilara had. His physician had tested the blood samples routinely drawn from all unmated females in the pack, a practice Ilara had always found revolting, but had never had the rank to challenge. The results came back, and Tyrell had summoned her to the stone hall, where the fire pit burned low and the shadows ate the walls. She remembered the way he had looked at her. Not with anger. That would have been simpler. He had looked at her the way someone looks at a stain on a tablecloth, with mild distaste, and the immediate question of how to remove it. "You carry a pup that is not of this pack," he had said. His voice was flat, conversational, the way someone might observe that it was raining. Ilara had stood very still, her wolf already weak, already. A threadbare thing more whisper than growl had pressed itself against the back of her ribs and gone quiet. "Greymore does not shelter bastards of unknown blood," Tyrell continued. He had been eating an apple. She remembered that. The small, wet sound of each bite. "You are reassigned to the eastern border. Report to Commander Voss." Commander Voss operated the easternmost outpost, a crumbling watchtower pressed against the border of Ironmore territory. Everyone knew what reassignment to the eastern border meant. It was where Greymore sent people it wanted to disappear. Ilara had not made it to the watchtower. The Ironmore patrol had found her 3 miles from the border, delirious with exhaustion, her field medic's kit still strapped to her back. They had not been cruel. They had not been kind either. They had simply processed her the way all enemy combatants were processed, with zip ties and a hood and a long walk downward into the dark. That had been 3 months ago. Now she sat in a cell 7 feet by 9 feet, with a straw pallet that smelled of mildew and previous occupants, and she counted guard rotations, and she talked to the baby. "You are going to be stubborn," she whispered. "I can tell already. You kick hardest right when I am about to fall asleep." The words echoed off the stone, somewhere above her, through layers of rock and mortar, and the foundations of a fortress she had only ever seen in intelligence briefings, the world continued without her. She did not know that the world above was about to crack open. The guard who brought her bread each morning was a young wolf named Sable. He had a shaved head and a scar that hooked from his left ear to his jaw, and he never spoke. For the first 2 months, he had slid the bread through the slot in the iron door without looking at her. But lately, in the last few weeks, something had shifted. He had started pausing. Not long. 3 seconds. 4. Just long enough for her to see his eyes flick down to her belly, then away. This morning, he paused longer than usual. Elara sat against the far wall, her knees drawn up as far as her stomach would allow, her fingers laced over the curve of it. She watched him through the slot. He slid the bread through. A heel of dark rye, same as always. But beneath it, wrapped in a scrap of cloth, was something else. She waited until his footsteps faded before she unwrapped it. A boiled egg. Still warm. She held it in both hands and pressed it against her cheek, feeling the warmth seep into skin that had forgotten what warmth felt like. Then she peeled it carefully, saving the shell fragments, because calcium was calcium, and she would grind them into her water later. She ate the egg in small bites, making each one last. The yolk was chalky and perfect. She closed her eyes, and for a moment she was somewhere else, entirely sitting in the Greymore mess hall, with the other medics laughing about something she could no longer remember. The baby kicked. "I know," she said. "We are still here." She pressed her back against the stone and felt the cold settle into her spine. Her wolf stirred a faint pulse deep in her chest, weaker than it had been yesterday, weaker than it had been last week. She was losing her. Elara could feel the bond between herself and her wolf thinning like a thread pulled too tight, and she knew what that meant. A wolf that went dormant during pregnancy sometimes never woke up. But there was the other thing. The thing she did not let herself think about. It had started in the 2nd month. Small moments. She would press her hand against the stone wall and feel something hum back, a vibration that had nothing to do with the plumbing or the foundations. She would close her eyes and sense the guards above her, not hear them, sense them, their heartbeats registering as faint points of light behind her eyelids. Once she had dreamed that her hands glowed silver, and when she woke up, the straw beneath her fingertips was warm. She had been tested as a child. Every pup in Greymore was tested at age 6. The results had come back unremarkable. Omega-class wolf. No elemental affinity. No bloodline markers of note. Her mother had died before Elara was old enough to ask questions, and her father had been a supply clerk who kept meticulous inventory records and never spoke about his mate. But sometimes the tests were wrong. Elara knew this because she was a medic, and she had seen the margin of error data, and she knew that the testing protocol Greymore used had been developed 40 years ago and had never been updated. She did not let herself think about it. Thinking about it led to hoping, and hoping in a dungeon was a form of self-destruction more efficient than starvation. So she ate her egg. She counted the guard rotations. She talked to the baby, and above her, without her knowledge or consent, the world was already tearing itself apart. The delegation from Ironmoor arrived at the throne room of Veldris Keep at sundown. Kyle Draconis stood at the window with his back to the room, watching the last light bleed out of the sky. The glass was old, hand-blown, rippled in a way that made the trees beyond the courtyard look like they were underwater. He pressed one finger against a bubble in the glass and felt the cold push back. Behind him, his war council was arguing. "The Ironmoor envoy says they want to renegotiate the Eastern Corridor," said Ronan, his second. Ronan had a voice like gravel in a blender, the result of a throat wound he had taken at the Battle of Ashenmere that had healed badly, because Ronan had refused to stop giving orders long enough for the medic to stitch it properly. "They do not want to renegotiate," Cale said without turning. "They want to delay. There is a difference. The difference being that Tyrell is moving troops to his southern flank, and he needs 2 more weeks to finish. The renegotiation is a stall. He will send diplomats who will talk in circles and drink our wine and leave having agreed to nothing, and in the meantime his border will be fortified." Silence. Then Ronan again. "So we decline the meeting. We accept the meeting." Kyle turned from the window. He was taller than everyone in the room, by a full head, a fact that had stopped being remarkable to him years ago, but never stopped being useful. His dark hair was cut short, a practical choice he had made, after an enemy had grabbed a fistful of it during close combat and nearly separated his head from his shoulders. The scar from that encounter ran along his jawline, a pale ridge that moved when he clenched his teeth. "We accept the meeting and we send our own delegation to the Eastern Corridor, while Tyrell's diplomats are here. When they return with nothing, we will already have eyes on his southern troop movement." Ronan's mouth twitched. That was as close to a smile as Ronan ever got. The council filed out. Kyle remained at the window. His wolf was restless. It had been restless for months, pacing inside his chest like something caged, pressing against his ribs with an urgency that had no identifiable source. Kyle was not a man given to anxiety. He had taken the throne at 22 after his father's assassination. He had fought 3 border wars, 2 internal coups, and a particularly tedious trade dispute with the coastal pacts that had nearly driven him to violence more effectively than any battlefield. He did not get restless without reason, but his wolf didn't deal in reasons. It dealt in instinct, and its instinct was screaming at him that something was wrong. Something was missing. Something that belonged to him was somewhere it should not be. He pressed his forehead against the cold glass and closed his eyes. "Where are you?" he murmured. It was not a question directed at anyone. It was a question directed at the hollow space beneath his sternum that had been aching for months. An ache with no injury, a hunger with no food. His wolf growled in response, low, impatient, directional, south, always south. The Ironmore delegation arrived 3 days later. Kyle met them in the great hall, seated on a throne carved from a single piece of black oak that his grandfather had hauled from the Deepwood 200 years ago. The throne was not comfortable. It was not meant to be comfortable. It was meant to make anyone who sat in it look like they had been carved from the same unyielding wood. The diplomats were exactly what he had expected. Polished, professional, hollow. They spoke in carefully constructed paragraphs about border agreements and mutual interests and sustainable territorial management, and Kyle listened with the patient attention of a man cataloguing ammunition. Then one of them said something that made his wolf stop pacing. It was the youngest diplomat, a female beta named Maeve, who had been handling the documentation. She was speaking to Ronan about prisoner exchanges, a standard agenda item in ceasefire negotiations. The numbers were routine. 14 Voldris soldiers held in Ironmore custody, 11 Ironmore soldiers held in Voldris. And how many non-combatants? Ronan asked, because Ronan always asked. Maeve shuffled her papers. "We have..." She paused. Her scent shifted. Something sharp like vinegar cutting through the lavender soap she used. That was the smell of a lie being constructed. 3 civilian detainees, she said. 2 trade merchants detained for suspected espionage. 1 field medic captured near the eastern border. All in standard holding. Kyle's wolf slammed against his ribs so hard he gripped the arm of the throne. "The field medic," he said. His voice cut through the room like a blade through silk. Everyone went still. "Describe them." Maeve's eyes widened. She looked at her lead diplomat, a silver-haired male who had been doing most of the talking. He gave her a barely perceptible nod. Female. Omega class. Captured approximately 3 months ago near the Eastern Watchtower. She was unarmed and appeared to be Maeve hesitated again, in a compromised physical condition. Define compromised. She appeared malnourished and pregnant. The room dropped into a silence so complete that Kyle could hear the candle wax popping in the iron chandelier above. His wolf was not pacing anymore. His wolf was standing perfectly still, every muscle locked, every sense oriented toward a single point. South, underground, alone. He felt it then. Not a thought, not a suspicion, a certainty that bypassed his brain entirely and settled into his bones like a tuning fork finding its frequency. Mine. The word was not his. It came from the wolf, from a place beneath language, and it resonated through his entire body until his teeth ached. He stood. He was aware of every eye in the room tracking the movement. He was aware that his hands were shaking, and that the shaking was visible, and that this was unprecedented, because the Alpha King of Valdris did not shake. "Where is she being held?" he said. Not a question, a demand wrapped in quiet. The lead diplomat's composure cracked. Just a fracture, a flicker of unease behind his eyes. Alpha Draconis, the prisoner exchange, is a matter for formal negotiation. We cannot simply... I am not negotiating. Kyle stepped down from the throne. Each step was deliberate, controlled. His wolf was clawing at his control with both hands, and he was holding it by a thread, and the thread was made of decades of discipline and the knowledge that if he let go in this room, people would die. He stopped in front of the lead diplomat, close enough that the man had to crane his neck to maintain eye contact. "You will tell me where she is being held," Kyle said, "or I will find her myself, and the path I take will go through every wall between here and her cell." The diplomat swallowed. It was an audible sound. "Ironmore Keep, the lower dungeons. Level 3. How many guards? 12 on the level. But Alpha Tyrell will not permit. Alpha Tyrell," Kyle said with a precision that could have cut glass, "can discuss his permissions with me directly." "Ronan." "Already moving," Ronan said from behind him. Kyle turned to the delegation. "You will remain here as my guests." He let the word guests sit in the air long enough for its actual meaning to register. "You will be treated well, but you will not leave until I return." He walked out of the hall without waiting for a response. His wolf was already running. The ride south took 7 hours at full gallop. Kyle brought 50 of his best. Not an army. A scalpel. Ronan rode at his right flank, and behind them came the Blackguard, his personal unit wolves, who had trained together since adolescence, and moved with a synchronization that looked choreographed, but was simply the product of absolute trust. They did not stop. They did not rest. Kyle's horse, a massive black destrier named Wraith, seemed to catch his urgency, and ran with a focus that went beyond training. The landscape blurred past in the dark pine forests and open meadow and the rocky foothills of the Ironmore range, and Kyle felt the pull growing stronger with every mile. He had spent years wondering why his wolf was restless, years of searching without knowing what he was searching for. He had attended summits and gatherings and mating ceremonies across 12 territories, and his wolf had been indifferent to every female presented to him, a fact that had generated considerable political anxiety among his council. Now he understood. His wolf had been waiting, not for someone to appear in front of him, but for him to go and find her. She had been taken. She was underground. She was pregnant and starving, and alone in an enemy's dungeon, and his wolf had been trying to tell him for months, and he had not listened because he had not known how to translate instinct into action without a direction to move in. Now he had a direction. They reached Ironmoor Keep at dawn. The fortress was built into the side of a granite cliff, a brutal architecture of angles and shadows designed to intimidate. The main gate was iron-reinforced oak, 20 feet tall, flanked by watchtowers manned by archers who were already tracking Cale's approach. He did not slow down. He dismounted 50 yards from the gate, and his boots hit packed earth, and he walked forward with the kind of calm that precedes earthquakes. Ronan and the blackguard fanned out behind him in a formation that was technically non-aggressive, but could become very aggressive in approximately half a second. A guard appeared on the wall above the gate. He was young. His voice cracked when he spoke. "Halt! State your—" His voice trailed off as he recognized the banner. "Oh! Open the gate," Kyle said. His voice carried without shouting. It was a skill he had learned from his mother, who had been able to silence a room of 300 with a whisper. The guard swallowed. "We need authorization from Alpha Tyrell. He is not currently—" The gate groaned. It did not open. It groaned, a sound of metal and wood under pressure, the sound of something being pushed from outside by a force that should not have been possible at this distance. Kyle had his hand extended palm flat, and the air around him had gone thick and electric, and the guards on the wall were backing away from the edge because the stones beneath their feet were vibrating. His wolf was at the surface. Not fully shifted, not yet, but present in a way that changed the physics of the space around him. The air smelled of ozone and pine and something old, something that predated language. The gate held for 4 more seconds. Then the iron hinges screamed, and the oak splintered down the center, a vertical crack that ran from top to bottom and blew inward in a shower of wood fragments and dust. Kyle walked through. The courtyard beyond was chaos. Guards scrambling swords, half-drawn wolves partially shifted. Kyle ignored all of it. He was following something deeper than sight or sound, a thread of connection that pulled him forward and down through the courtyard, through an archway, down a set of stone steps that descended into the earth. Ronan fell in behind him. The blackguard secured the courtyard without violence, which was a testament to their training, and to the fact that the Ironmoor wolves had seen the gate implode and were rapidly recalculating their priorities. Down. Stone walls narrowing. The air growing colder, damper thick with the smell of old water and human endurance. Torches in iron brackets that threw shadows like reaching hands. Level 1. Guard posts empty. The guards had heard the gate. Level 2. Storage, supplies, the detritus of imprisonment. Level 3. The corridor was narrow and dark and lined with iron doors. Most were open. Empty cells, abandoned. But at the far end, one door was closed, and through that door, Cale could feel a heartbeat. 2 heartbeats. His wolf went so still inside him that he thought for a moment it had stopped breathing. Then it made a sound he had never heard it make before, a sound that was not a growl or a snarl, but something closer to a word, something that meant found. And finally, and mine all at once. He reached the door, his hand pressed flat against the iron. It was cold. His palm left a print of condensation. "Stand back," he said, quiet, gentle, as if he were speaking to someone on the other side of a wound. Then he pushed. Iron does not bend. This is a physical law, a fact of metallurgy and molecular structure. But the lock sheared, and the hinges popped, and the door swung inward with a sound like a sigh, and the torchlight from the corridor spilled into a cell 7 feet by 9 feet. She was in the corner. Small. So much smaller than he had imagined. She was pressed against the back wall with her knees drawn up, and her arms wrapped around her belly, and her hair was matted, and her dress was torn, and her eyes were enormous in a face that was all bone and shadow. She looked at him. He looked at her. The mate bond did not hit like lightning. That was what the stories said that it struck, that it was violent, sudden electric. But it was not like that. It was like a door opening in a room he had always known was there, but had never been able to find. It was like the moment between exhaling and inhaling, the pause where the body decides to continue. It was like coming home to a house he had never seen before, and knowing where every room was. She smelled of limestone and stale bread and exhaustion, and beneath all of that, beneath the months of captivity and hunger and fear, she smelled of wildflowers after rain, sweet clover and something bright that his wolf identified as mate before his brain caught up. "Who are you?" she whispered. Her voice was rough, unused. It cracked on the second word. Kyle knelt. Slowly, deliberately. The Alpha King of Valdris feared across 6 territories, the man who had just torn through a fortress gate with his bare will, knelt on the dirty stone floor of a dungeon cell, and made himself small. "My name is Kyle," he said. "I am going to take you out of here." She stared at him. Her eyes were dark, nearly black in the dim light, and they held a wariness so deep it had become structural. A wariness that was not fear, but something harder. A refusal to believe in rescue, because believing in rescue was a luxury she had long since abandoned. "I do not know you," she said. "I know." His voice was steady. He could feel his wolf pressing against every boundary he had, demanding that he reach for her, pull her close, shelter her with his body. He held it back. "You do not have to know me. You just have to let me carry you up the stairs." She looked at the open door behind him, at the torchlight, at the corridor that led upward toward air that was not damp, toward light that was not borrowed. She looked at him again. Then she did something that broke him more completely than any battle wound ever had. She placed her hand on her belly and she said, "There are 2 of us." "I know," he said again. He held out his hand, palm up. Steady. He would have held it there for an hour. He would have held it there until the stone walls crumbled around them both. She reached for it. Her fingers were cold, thin. He could feel the bones beneath the skin, the architecture of a body that had been consuming itself to feed the life inside it. He closed his hand around hers with a care usually reserved for things made of glass. She tried to stand. Her legs buckled. He caught her before she hit the ground, one arm behind her back, the other beneath her knees, and he lifted her as if she weighed nothing, which was close to the truth. She was too light. She was dangerously light. He could feel the sharp ridge of her hip against his forearm and the fragile ladder of her ribs through the thin fabric of her dress. She made a sound. Not a word. A small, involuntary sound, like someone who has been cold for so long that warmth is almost painful. "I have you," he said. She pressed her face against his chest. He felt the dampness of tears against his shirt and the flutter of the second heartbeat against his arm. He carried her up. The courtyard was bright. She flinched against the light, turning her face into his shoulder, and he angled his body to shade her. Ronan was waiting by the horses with an expression that Cale had never seen on his second's face before. It took him a moment to identify it. It was tenderness. Ronan, whose throat wound made him sound like a collapsing building who had once punched a diplomat for suggesting that Valdris should consider proportional response, was looking at the woman in Cale's arms with something undeniably close to tenderness. "The medic," Kyle said. Ronan snapped back to operational mode. "Already here." He gestured, and a woman in a dark traveling cloak stepped forward. She had a leather bag over one shoulder, and the calm, quick eyes of someone trained to assess damage without flinching. Her name was Seren. She had been Kyle's field physician for 6 years, and she took one look at Ilara and said, "Dehydration, malnutrition. Second trimester, approximately 20 weeks. We need fluids, protein, and warmth in that order." "Can she ride? She rides with me," Kyle said. No one questioned this. He mounted Wraith with Ilara still in his arms, settling her against his chest with the cloak wrapped around both of them. She had not spoken since the cell. Her eyes were half closed, the exhaustion pulling her under, but her hand gripped the front of his shirt with a strength that contradicted her frailty. They rode north. Slower now. Kyle kept Wraith to a smooth canter, adjusting his grip whenever the horse shifted beneath them. Ilara drifted in and out of consciousness, and each time she surfaced, she seemed surprised to find herself still there, still held still, moving through open air. Once about an hour into the ride, she opened her eyes and looked up at him. "You smell like pine," she said. Her voice was a whisper. Pine and black tea. Something detonated in his chest. He tightened his arm around her and pressed his chin against the top of her head, and said nothing, because there was nothing to say, that his wolf was not already saying a continuous low vibration in his chest that she could probably feel against her back, a sound that meant safe, safe, safe. She slept. The baby kicked against his forearm. He counted each kick like a heartbeat. They reached Valdris Keep in the late afternoon. He carried her inside himself, through the great hall past the servants who stopped, and stared up the main staircase, down the corridor to the rooms adjacent to his own. He laid her on the bed, which was wide and soft and covered in furs, and she sank into it like someone drowning in reverse. Seren went to work. Kyle stood in the doorway and watched, and his wolf watched, and neither of them moved. The assessment took 20 minutes. Seren emerged with a list. She is underweight by at least 30 pounds. The baby is small but viable. Her wolf is in dormancy, nearly fully receded. She has old bruising on her arms and back, consistent with rough handling during capture. There are rope marks on her wrists that are weeks old. She has a mild infection in her left hand from a cut that was not treated. She is also, and here Seren paused, choosing her words, displaying some anomalous readings. Her core temperature is elevated beyond what pregnancy alone would explain, and her eyes responded to the light test in a way I haven't seen before. Meaning what? Meaning I am not sure. But I would recommend having Elder Mora examine her when she is strong enough. Elder Mora was the pack's oldest living healer, a woman of indeterminate age who had served 3 generations of Draconis Alphas and who claimed to remember things that had happened before she was born, a claim that no one had ever been brave enough to challenge. "Call her," Kyle said. Seren left. Kyle entered the room. Ilara was awake. She was propped against the pillows with a cup of broth in both hands, drinking slowly, and the color was already returning to her face. Not much. A faint flush along her cheekbones. But enough. He pulled a chair to the bedside. He did not sit in it the way he sat on his throne. He sat in it the way a person sits when they are prepared to stay for a very long time. "You were Greymore," he said. She nodded. Her eyes tracked him over the rim of the cup, watchful. "What happened?" She took a sip, set the cup down. Her fingers curled around the edge of the blanket. Alpha Tyrell discovered the pregnancy. She said it flatly, the way someone states the weather. Unmated Omega, carrying an unidentified pup. He reassigned me to the eastern border. She paused. I did not make it there. Who is the father? I do not know his name. She said it without shame, without apology. She said it the way she might have said, I do not know the time, as a simple fact. Kyle's wolf growled. Not at her, at the entire situation, at the chain of failures and cruelties that had brought her from a ceasefire summit to a dungeon cell. The summit, he said. His voice was careful. The autumn summit. 8 months ago. She looked at him sharply, her eyes narrowed, the watchfulness sharpened into something pointed. Yes, she said slowly. Were you stationed near the Eastern Pavilion? Her hand tightened on the blanket. How do you know that? She said. Kyle leaned forward, his elbows on his knees, his hands clasped between them. He could feel his wolf pressing against the inside of his skin, vibrating with a frequency that was almost audible. Because I was there, he said. The silence that followed was the loudest thing that had ever existed in that room. Ilara's lips parted. Her eyes moved across his face with the intensity of someone reading a map, tracing the jawline, the scar, the dark hair, the broad shoulders reassembling fragments of a memory she had dissolved in grief and cedar wine. You, she whispered. Me. But that is not. She set the cup down because her hands were shaking. That would mean. Yes, he said. The baby kicked. They both felt it. Her hand went to her belly, and his eyes followed the movement, and his wolf made that sound again, the one that was not a word, but contained every word. He reached across the space between them and placed his hand next to hers on the curve of her stomach. Not touching her. Close enough for the heat of his palm to reach her skin through the blanket. May I, he said. She stared at his hand. Then she lifted hers and placed it on top of his and pressed both of their palms flat against the swell where their child was turning in its small, dark, warm world. Kyle closed his eyes. The bond was not a lightning strike. It was a tide. It came in, slowly filling every hollow space, every crack, every empty room he had built inside himself. It was warm and relentless, and it tasted like wildflowers after rain. He did not say mine, because she was not a possession. He did not say, I will never let you go, because she was not a prisoner. He said, you are safe now. She did not believe him. He could see it. The doubt was layered into her like sediment, months of captivity and years of dismissal, packed tight into the foundation of her. She had been told she was nothing by people who had the authority to make it true, and the believing would take time. That was fine. He had time. The days that followed were careful. Seren established a nutrition plan that Ilara followed, with the methodical discipline of a medic who understood exactly what her body needed and why. Bone broth 3 times a day, eggs, dark leafy greens, organ meat which she ate without complaint and with a clinical detachment that impressed even Seren. Kyle gave her space. He did not crowd. He did not hover. He stationed himself at a specific distance, close enough to be reached far enough to not feel like surveillance. Each morning he sent a tray to her room. Each evening he ate dinner in the hall adjacent to hers, and the door between them was open, but he never walked through it uninvited. His wolf protested this arrangement with a sustained fury that gave him headaches. He ignored it. On the 4th day, Ilara walked into the hall. She was wearing borrowed clothes, a soft wool tunic that was too large for her, and trousers cinched tight at the waist. Her hair was clean. It was brown, dark brown, and longer than he had realized in the dungeon, falling past her shoulders in waves that were still finding their shape after months of neglect. She was not beautiful in the way the word was typically deployed. She was interesting, angular. Her face had the kind of specificity that made you look twice and then keep looking. She sat across from him at the table. "I want to help," she said. "With what?" "Your medical unit. I am a field medic. I know wound care, herbal pharmacology, and emergency triage." She folded her hands on the table. "I am not able to fight, but I can be useful. I need to be useful." He studied her. Not her face. Her hands. They were steadier than they had been 4 days ago. The infection in her left hand was responding to the poultice. Her fingers were long, capable. Healer's hands. "Talk to Seren," he said. She nodded. She stood. She started to leave. "Elara." She stopped. Turned. "Eat first." She looked at the table which held bread and cheese, and a pot of herbal tea, and 2 plates. She looked at him. Something shifted in her expression, a hairline fracture in the wall she had built, just wide enough for light to get through. She sat back down. They ate in silence. But it was a different kind of silence. A silence with architecture, with load-bearing walls and a roof. A silence you could live in. She began working with Seren the next day. Her skills were sharp despite 3 months of disuse. She had a particular talent for herbal remedies, a knowledge base that Seren said exceeded her own in certain areas. She could identify plants by smell and knew dosages by weight without measuring. She was quiet with the patients efficient, and she had a way of touching injuries that seemed to draw the pain outward, a technique she attributed to training, but that Seren watched with increasingly narrowed eyes. The warriors noticed, not her skill, though they appreciated it. They noticed the way the Alpha's scent clung to the air whenever she was near, even when Kyle himself was nowhere in sight. They noticed the way their own wolves responded to her, a settling, a calming, a subtle shift in the pack's emotional weather that none of them could explain. On the 8th day, Elder Mora arrived. She was small, impossibly small, a woman who had been shrinking for decades and showed no sign of stopping. She had white hair braided in a crown around her head and hands that trembled with age, but steadied the moment they found work to do. She examined Elara in a private room with Seren present and Kyle pacing the hallway outside. The examination took over an hour. When the door opened, it was not Mora or Seren who emerged, but Elara herself. She stood in the doorway with an expression Kyle could not read, an expression that was not shock or fear or joy, but some compound emotion that contained all 3. She said, "I need to sit down." He guided her to the window seat. She sat. She pressed her hand against the glass, and where her fingers touched the condensation, retreated, leaving 5 perfect clear spots through which the evening light streamed gold. "Mora says my mother was not from Greymoor," Elara said. She was speaking to the glass. Her voice was remarkably steady for someone delivering seismic information. She was from the Silvervein line. Old blood. Very old. The kind of bloodline they used to call Starborn, though Mora says that is just what the old packs called wolves, whose abilities did not fit into standard categories. Kyle was very still. The tests I took at 6 were wrong. Or they were right, and the markers were misread. Mora says Silvervein wolves often test as Omega because their energy signature reads as passive, but it is not passive, it is, she searched for the word, stored, compressed, like a spring. And pregnancy can trigger the release. That is why you can sense the guards through stone, Kyle said. She looked at him. "I watched you do it," he said. "In the dungeon. Before I came in. I could feel it through the door. You were mapping the heartbeats of every person on that level." She swallowed. She looked back at the glass. Her handprint was glowing, not brightly, not dramatically, a faint, steady silver luminescence that outlined her fingers like moonlight through water. Mora says the baby amplifies it, she said. The pup carries both lines, Silvervein and... She paused. And Draconis. She looked at him now, directly, with the full weight of a revelation she had been carrying alone for 5 minutes, which was long enough. Mora says the Draconis line has not crossed with Silvervein in 400 years. She says the last time it happened, the resulting child ended a war. The room was quiet. The light through the glass was gold. Her handprint was silver. Together they made something that looked like dawn. Kyle knelt. Not because she was a queen, though she would be. Not because the revelation demanded deference. He knelt because he wanted to look up at her, to see her from below, to place himself in a position where she was the highest point in the room. "I did not come for you because of your bloodline," he said. "I came because my wolf has been pointing south for 3 months. And I did not understand why until I heard your heartbeat through an iron door." She looked down at him, her hand still glowing faintly, still trembling slightly, reached out and touched the scar on his jaw. Her fingertips traced it. Where her touch passed, the scar warmed. "You tore down a gate," she said. "I would have torn down the mountain." She almost smiled. It was not a full smile. It was the structural precursor to a smile, the shift in musculature and intent that precedes the actual expression. But it was there. "I am not ready," she said. Her voice was honest, not apologetic. "I have been in a cell for 3 months, and before that, I was in a pack that treated me like a stain on a tablecloth. I do not know how to be what you want me to be. I want you to be a medic who eats 3 meals a day and sleeps in a room with windows. Everything else can wait. Everything. She searched his face. Whatever she found there made the almost smile grow fractionally closer to actual. "Okay," she said. He stood. He held out his hand. She took it and pulled herself up, and they stood in the window with the gold and silver light between them, and neither of them let go for a very long time. The peace lasted 12 days. On the 13th day, Greymoor declared war. Not formally. Tyrell was not the kind to send declarations. He was the kind to send soldiers in the night, which he did a strike force of 60 wolves aimed at the Valdris eastern border, with instructions to burn, scatter, and return before dawn. Kyle received the intelligence report at midnight. He was in his study, which was adjacent to the room where Elara was sleeping. He had left the door open. He always left the door open. Ronan brought the news in person because Ronan didn't trust messengers with information that could start a war. Tyrell is claiming we violated the ceasefire by taking the prisoner from Ironmoor, Ronan said. He stood in the doorway, with blood on his boots from the border patrol he had just debriefed. He says the pregnant medic was his property. Kyle's hand stopped moving. He had been writing. The pen rested on the paper. A drop of ink bled into the word he had been forming. "His property," Kyle repeated. "His word. Not mine. What are our losses? 3 border posts damaged. 2 warriors wounded non-critical. No casualties. The strike force withdrew before our reinforcements arrived." Kyle set the pen down. He looked at the drop of ink on the paper. It had formed a shape like a small, dark star. "He wants her back," Kyle said. "He wants to provoke us into overreacting so he can claim defensive justification to the High Council." Ronan paused. "But yes, he also wants her back." "Why?" Ronan hesitated. This was unusual for Ronan, who typically communicated with the verbal equivalent of a battering ram. "There are rumors," Ronan said carefully, from inside Greymore, the Silvervein bloodline is not just rare. It is considered in some older traditions a threat to established alpha lines. A Silvervein wolf fully awakened can challenge the hierarchy itself, not through combat, through something else. The old texts call it resonance, the ability to shift allegiances at a biological level, to make wolves question their alpha bond. You are telling me that Tyrell did not discard her because she was an inconvenient Omega. He discarded her because he was afraid of her. I am telling you that he discarded her because his father's father killed the last known Silvervein wolf and buried the body in an unmarked grave, and Tyrell knew exactly what her bloodline was, and chose to destroy her quietly rather than risk her waking up. The ink star on the paper was drying. Kyle stared at it. She was never an Omega, he said. No. She was a loaded weapon that Greymore could not afford to let fire, and now she is here, awakening mated to the most powerful alpha on the continent, and carrying a child that combines two bloodlines that have not met in 4 centuries. If I were Tyrell, I would be panicking too. Kyle stood. Move the Western Regiment to the Eastern Corridor. Full defensive posture. No engagement unless engaged. I want scouts in Greymore territory within the hour, and I want to know every move Tyrell makes before he makes it. And Elara Kyle looked at the open door. Beyond it, in the soft dark of the bedroom, he could hear her breathing. Slow, deep. The sound of someone sleeping safely for the first time in months. She stays, he said. She stays, and she decides what she wants to do with what she is. That is not my choice. Ronan studied him for a long moment. Then he nodded and left. Kyle did not sleep that night. He sat in the doorway between his study and her room and listened to her breathe, and thought about loaded weapons and buried bodies, and the particular cruelty of a man who would throw away a person because he could not control them. He thought about Tyrell eating an apple while he exiled a pregnant woman. He thought about the sound the apple had made. Elara found out about the war the way she found out about most things. By observing the evidence and drawing her own conclusions. She noticed the increased patrols. She noticed the tension in the warriors she was treating, the way their injuries had shifted from training accidents to something sharper, more deliberate. She noticed Ronan's boots. You are preparing for war, she said to Kyle on the 14th morning. They were eating breakfast. She had started eating breakfast with him 4 days ago, without discussion or invitation. She simply appeared. He simply set a second plate. Yes, he said. Because of me. Because of Tyrell. Because Tyrell wants me back. Kyle set down his bread. He looked at her. She was different than she had been 2 weeks ago. Not just physically, though. The physical changes were significant. She had gained weight. Not much, but enough that her face had softened the sharp edges, rounding into something that suggested health rather than deprivation. The baby was showing more prominently now, a curve beneath the tunic that she rested her hand on when she was thinking. But the deeper change was in her eyes. The wariness was still there. It would always be there, probably. But it had been joined by something else. Attention or engagement. The look of someone who was starting to care about what happened next. Tyrell wants control, Kyle said. You are the justification, not the cause. He sent me away to die, she said. And now he wants me back because I turned out to be valuable. Her voice was flat, but her hand pressed harder against her belly. That is a very Greymore way of thinking about people. It is. She was quiet for a moment. Mora has been teaching me, she said. The resonance, the Silvervein abilities. She says I am progressing faster than she expected. She says the pregnancy accelerates everything. And how do you feel about it? She looked at her hands. They were not glowing. They had not glowed since that day at the window. But there was something about them, a quality of stillness that suggested potential rather than passivity. I feel like I spent my entire life being told I was empty, she said. And now I am finding out I was full the whole time. That what they called weakness was just something they did not have a name for. She looked up at him. I will not go back to him, she said. Not because you are protecting me, because I am choosing to stay. The distinction mattered. He could see it in the set of her jaw and the square of her shoulders, and the way her wolf, still dormant, still buried deep, seemed to press against the surface of her skin, like something testing the thickness of ice. I know, he said. And if he comes for me, she said, I will not hide. I know that too. They finished breakfast. She cleared the plates. He watched her move through the room and felt the bond pulse between them, steady and warm, a heartbeat shared between two bodies. The attack came on the 21st day. Not at the border, not at the keep. At the place no one expected, which was the purpose. Tyrell had sent a second force, smaller than the first. Not soldiers, specialists, wolves trained for infiltration, rather than combat, the kind of operatives who moved through enemy territory, like smoke, leaving no trail, making no sound. They came through the old mining tunnels that ran beneath the Eastern Mountains, tunnels that predated all the Pax remnants of a human civilization that had dug too deep and found things they could not explain. The tunnels connected to the Valdris cellars, a fact that appeared on no official map, because the entrance had been sealed 200 years ago. It was not sealed anymore. Elara was in the medical wing when she felt them. Not heard. Not saw. Felt. The resonance that Mora had been teaching her to control surged without warning, a wave of awareness that crashed through her body and left her gasping, braced against the treatment table with both hands. She could feel them. 6 wolves moving through stone, their heartbeats synchronized, their intent compressed to a single sharp point. They were below her. They were climbing. And they were hunting something specific. They were hunting her. She did not freeze. She did not panic. She had spent 3 months in a dungeon. Panic was a luxury she had metabolized and converted to something harder. Seren, she said. Her voice was steady. There are wolves in the tunnels. 6. Coming up through the east cellar. They are here for me. Seren did not ask how she knew. Seren had been watching Elara for 2 weeks and had stopped being surprised approximately 8 days ago. She sent the alert. She armed herself. She moved to block the medical wing's entrance. Elara went to the window. She could feel Kyle. He was in the training yard, a 1/4 mile away, and the moment she reached for him through the bond, he was already moving, already running his wolf, surging to the surface with a violence that she could feel like heat on her face. But he would not arrive in time. The first infiltrator came through the cellar door silently. He was fast, trained, efficient. He neutralized the guard at the stairwell with a chokehold that made no sound. He moved up the corridor toward the medical wing with the fluid grace of someone who had memorized the layout. Elara stood in the center of the medical wing and waited. She had never done this before. Mora had taught her theory, technique, philosophy. But she had never tested it against a real threat, and the power inside her was still new, still uncharted, still coiled so tight that releasing it felt like letting go of a rope that held back a river. The door opened. The infiltrator was a lean, scarred male with amber eyes, and the Greymore sigil tattooed on his wrist. He saw her and his expression flickered. Recognition. Confirmation. He reached for her. Ilara exhaled. The resonance left her body like a sound too low to hear. It moved through the air, through the stone, through the marrow of the infiltrator's bones. It did not hurt him. It did something worse. It reached into the place where his wolf lived and asked a question. The question was, why are you loyal to a man who eats apples while he exiles pregnant women? The infiltrator stopped. His hand hung in the air 6 inches from her arm. His eyes went wide. Behind them, something was happening, a tectonic shift in the landscape of his allegiance. Not a forced change, not a command. A question he had never thought to ask himself now, lodged in his consciousness like a splinter. He lowered his hand. He started. The door behind him exploded inward. Kyle came through it like a force of nature, shifted halfway, his hands, clawed his eyes blazing amber gold, a snarl ripping from his chest that made the walls vibrate. He had covered the 1/4 mile in under 90 seconds. His shirt was torn. There was blood on his knuckles from a wall he had punched through. He saw the infiltrator standing near Ilara. He saw Ilara standing unharmed. He processed both facts simultaneously, and his wolf, which had been prepared for slaughter, recalibrated so fast that the energy had nowhere to go, and discharged into the air as a pulse of raw power that knocked every loose object in the room sideways. The infiltrator dropped to his knees. Not from the force, from the question still echoing in his skull. The remaining 5 were captured in the tunnels by the Blackguard, who had arrived seconds after Kale. 3 resisted and were subdued. 2 surrendered. All of them were carrying the same orders written in Tyrell's own hand on paper that smelled of apple. Bring the Silvervein female back, alive if convenient. Otherwise ensure the bloodline dies with her. Kyle read the orders once. His face did not change. He folded the paper and placed it in his breast pocket. He turned to Ilara. She was leaning against the treatment table. Her hands were trembling. The resonance had taken something out of her, a physical cost she had not anticipated. But she was upright. She was whole. And her hand was on her belly, and the baby was kicking, and her wolf, for the first time since the dungeon stirred. It was faint. A whisper. A breath of fog on cold glass. But it was there. Ilara's eyes widened. Her hand moved from her belly to her chest, pressing flat against her sternum. "Oh," she said. Kyle was at her side in 2 strides. "What is it? What is happening?" She laughed. It was a small, startled, incredulous sound, the laugh of someone who has just found something they had given up looking for. "She is waking up," Ilara whispered. "My wolf, she is waking up." Kyle felt it through the bond, a second resonance deeper than the first, vibrating at a frequency that matched his own wolf so precisely that for a moment the 2 felt like one continuous note. He pressed his forehead against hers. Their breath mixed. His wolf and hers reached for each other through the thin barrier of skin and bone and found each other and held on. Around them, the medical wing was a disaster. Overturned tables, scattered supplies, a captured infiltrator still kneeling on the floor with an existential crisis, and 6 Blackguard wolves standing over him in various states of readiness. None of it mattered. Can you feel that Ilara whispered against his mouth? Yes. It feels like coming home. Yes. He kissed her, not roughly, not possessively. He kissed her the way you close a book you have been reading for a very long time, with the weight of everything that came before, pressing the pages together. She kissed him back. The War Council convened at dawn the next day. Kyle sat at the head of the table with Ronan at his right, and Alara at his left, and if anyone found this arrangement unusual, they had the good sense not to mention it. The orders were clear. Tyrell had authorized the assassination of a pregnant woman and her unborn child. This was not a border dispute. This was not a political provocation. This was an act of war under every code that governed the Pax. Kyle didn't want war. He had fought enough wars to know that they were won by the side that was most willing to absorb suffering, and he had no interest in feeding his people into that calculus. But Tyrell had reached into his home, into the room where his mate slept, into the space where his child was growing. There were limits. "I will offer him one chance," Kyle said. The council waited. Direct challenge, alpha to alpha. "His crimes are against my mate and my pup. The old laws allow me to settle this personally." Ronan's expression did not change, which meant he approved. If Ronan disapproved, his expression did not change either, but the quality of the not changing was different. Kyle had known Ronan long enough to read the distinction. "If he refuses," Ronan asked, "then we go to Greymoor with the full army, and we do not stop until we reach his hall." Alara spoke. She had been quiet through the briefing absorbing. When she spoke, every head turned. "He will not refuse," she said. Her voice was calm, analytical, the field medic assessing the situation. "Tyrell is vain. He believes he is the strongest alpha on the continent. He will take the challenge because refusing it would mean admitting he is afraid. And fear is the one thing his authority cannot survive." She was right. Cale knew she was right. His wolf knew she was right. Even Ronan, whose opinion of Greymoor was approximately equivalent to his opinion of dental surgery, conceded with a fractional nod. The challenge was sent by Messenger Hawk. It arrived in Greymoor at midday and was accepted by nightfall. The grounds were set for 3 days hence, at the neutral territory known as the Ashenmere Plains, where the last major interpack battle had been fought a generation ago. The earth there was still scarred by it. The grass grew different, darker in patches, where blood had soaked too deep. The 3 days passed in a particular kind of silence, the silence of preparation, of sharpening, of the space between the lightning and the thunder. Kyle trained. He did not train harder than usual, because harder than usual was a good way to arrive at a fight injured. He trained with precision reviewing techniques, refining angles, reminding his body of patterns it knew better than language. Alara did not watch him train. She worked in the medical wing preparing supplies because she was a medic, and medics prepared for the aftermath, and she was practical enough to prepare for an aftermath that included either outcome. On the second night, she came to his room. She did not knock. She opened the door and walked in, and found him sitting on the edge of his bed in the dark, his hands hanging between his knees, his head bowed. She sat next to him. Their shoulders touched. "Are you afraid?" she asked. "No." "Liar." He exhaled. It was almost a laugh. "I am not afraid of him. I am afraid of what happens to you if I lose." She was quiet for a moment. Then she took his hand and placed it on her belly, and the baby kicked against his palm, and she said, "Then do not lose." He turned his head and looked at her in the dark. She was silver in the moonlight that came through the window, silver and shadow, and her eyes were steady and clear, and they held something he had not seen in them before. Trust. He leaned forward and pressed his lips against her forehead, her temple the corner of her eye, where a tear track had dried hours ago. She turned into him, and their mouths found each other, and the kiss was different this time, deeper, slower, a conversation conducted without words. She stayed. In the morning they rode to Ashenmere. The plains were flat and wide, and the sky above them was the color of hammered tin. Both packs had assembled at their respective edges, Valdris to the north, Greymoor to the south, with 100 yards of neutral ground between them. Kyle walked to the center. He wore no armor, no weapon. This was an alpha challenge wolf to wolf, and the rules were older than any kingdom. Tyrell walked out to meet him. He was shorter than Kyle by 3 inches, broader, built like a battering ram, thick through the chest and shoulders with hands that looked like they had been designed for demolition. His hair was iron grey, despite his relative youth, a family trait that the Greymoor line wore with pride. His eyes were the color of wet gravel. He stopped 10 feet from Kyle. "Draconis," he said. His voice was conversational, pleasant even. He might have been greeting a neighbor at a fence line. "Tyrell, I want you to know that this is not personal." Tyrell clasped his hands behind his back. "The Silvervein issue is a pack security matter. You would understand if you had been briefed on the full history." "I have been briefed," Kyle said. "Your grandfather murdered the last known Silvervein wolf and buried her in a field. You attempted to murder the next one by sending her to die at the border. When that failed, you sent assassins to my home with orders to kill her and my unborn child." He paused. "This is personal." Tyrell's expression didn't change, but something behind it moved. A flicker. Not guilt, exactly. Something more complicated. The shadow of a man who had inherited a problem he did not create and had solved it the only way he knew how, which was the way his father and his father's father had solved things with silence and shallow graves. "She was not supposed to survive," Tyrell said. He said it quietly, almost to himself, and for a moment he was not an alpha posturing for his pack. He was a man standing in a field explaining something he had never said out loud. "My father told me about the Silvervein wolves when I was 12. He told me they were a disease, that they could unravel a pack's loyalty the way you pull a thread from a sweater. He told me that if I ever found one, I should be decisive." He looked at Kyle. "I was decisive," he said. "I was wrong about what that word meant. But I was decisive." It was the closest thing to an admission that Tyrell had ever made. Not an apology. Not a justification. Just a man acknowledging that he had followed instructions without questioning them, and that the instructions had been poison. Then his expression hardened again, and the moment was gone. And he was Tyrell again, Alpha of Greymoor. And the challenge was upon them. They shifted simultaneously. Kyle's wolf was black, not dark brown or charcoal, but black, the black of deep water, of the space between stars. He was massive even by alpha standards, a wolf built for endurance rather than speed, with shoulders that could carry the weight of a kingdom and a jaw that could end arguments. Tyrell's wolf was grey and white, mottled like stone, thick-furred and powerful. He was fast, faster than Coil expected. The first strike came before. The shift was fully complete, a lunging snap at Kale's throat that missed by inches and drew first blood from his shoulder. Kyle felt the pain as data. Shallow, non-structural, acceptable. They circled. The packs on both sides were silent. No cheering, no howling. This was sacred. This was the oldest law. Tyrell attacked again, low this time, going for Kale's legs. Kyle absorbed the impact, bracing his weight, letting Tyrell's momentum carry him past, then catching him with a rake across the flank that opened a line of red from hip to ribs. They separated, blood on the grass, both breathing hard. Kyle could feel Elara. She was standing at the edge of the Valdris line, flanked by Ronan and Seren, and her heartbeat was fast but steady. Through the bond, he could feel her wolf awake, now fully awake, pressing against the surface of her consciousness with a silver intensity that pulsed in time with his own. She was not afraid. Neither was he. The fight lasted 11 minutes. Afterward, when people talked about it, they would argue about specific moments, specific techniques, whether the feint at the 7-minute mark was intentional or reflexive, whether the final sequence was skill or something else, something that did not have a name in the combat lexicon. What happened was this. At the 9-minute mark, Tyrell caught Cale's left hind leg and bit down. The pain was significant, structural. Cale felt the bone flex and understood that he had approximately 3 seconds before the bite deepened and the leg broke. He did not pull away. He drove forward into the bite, accepting the pain, using the leverage to twist his body over Tyrell's back and bring his jaws to the back of Tyrell's neck. The grip was not a killing grip. It was a submission hold, an offer. Tyrell could yield. The old laws allowed it. He would lose his pack, his territory, his authority. But he would live. Tyrell did not yield. He thrashed. He snarled. He fought with the desperation of someone who understood that everything he had been, every decision he had made, every instruction he had followed, was collapsing beneath him. Kyle held. His jaw tightened. Not enough to kill. Enough to make the choice clear. Yield, he thought, and the thought carried through the pressure of the hold, through the biological imperative of alpha dominance. Yield and live. Tyrell went still. For 3 heartbeats, neither of them moved. The wind blew across the plains, and the grass bent, and the sky was the color of hammered tin, and the blood on the ground was the only color. Then Tyrell's body relaxed. Not submission. Something harder. Acceptance. The recognition that he had followed a path to its end, and the end was here, on a field where the grass grew dark in patches. He yielded. Kyle released him. He stepped back. He shifted the wolf, receding, the man returning, standing bloodied and breathing hard on the Ashenmere plains. Tyrell shifted too. He was on his knees. His neck was bruised where the hold had pressed. He did not look up. The Greymoor pack was silent. Then, one by one, they began to lower their eyes. Not to Tyrell. To Cale. It was over. Cale turned. Elara was walking toward him across the neutral ground, and she was glowing, not metaphorically. Her skin was luminous with a silver light that pulsed in time with her heartbeat, and the baby was kicking, and her wolf was at the surface of her eyes, bright and awake and wild, and the resonance rolling off her in waves was making every wolf on the field feel something they could not name, but would remember for the rest of their lives. She reached him. She put her hands on his face, his bloody, bruised, victorious face, and she looked at him with eyes that held silver fire. "You did not kill him," she said. "No." "Why?" "Because he yielded. And because killing a man who followed poison instructions does not cure the poison. It just buries it again." She searched his face. Then she kissed him there in front of both packs, on the blood-dark grass, with silver light on her skin, and his arms around her, and the baby between them. A wolf in the Valdris line howled. Then another. Then the whole pack, a rising chorus that shook the sky. 3 of the Greymoor wolves joined in. Then 7. Then all of them. The ceremony was held at Valdris Keep 2 weeks later. It was not the ceremony Cale's council had planned. They had planned something elaborate, political, a display of power designed to cement alliances and signal strength. Elara had listened to the plans for approximately 4 minutes before saying no. She wanted it small. She wanted it real. She wanted it in the courtyard, where the old oak grew, the one whose roots had cracked the original foundation stones, and which no Draconis Alpha had ever had the heart to cut down. She wore a white dress that Seren had made from linen, traded from the coastal packs, simple, unadorned, with long sleeves that covered the rope scars on her wrists. She did not cover them out of shame. She covered them because the dress was beautiful, and the scars were part of a chapter she was closing, not one she was hiding. Kyle wore black. He always wore black. Elara had once asked him why, and he had said, "It does not show the blood." And she had laughed, which was the first time he had heard her laugh, and the sound had restructured something fundamental in his chest. Eldamora officiated. She stood on a wooden box so she could reach their hands. The marking was the part the stories always got wrong. They described it as savage dramatic, a violent claiming. It was not. Kyle tilted his head to give her access to his neck, and she pressed her lips there first, softly feeling the pulse beneath her mouth. Then her wolf, bright and silver, and finally whole, guided the bite. His blood tasted of pine resin and black tea. He marked her in return. Gently. Precisely. With the care of a man holding something he intended to keep for the rest of his life. The bond completed. It was not a lightning strike. It was the moment the ocean touches the shore, and neither can remember being separate. The courtyard was full. Valdris wolves, some Greymoor wolves who had followed Kale after the challenge, Ronan standing at the back with his arms crossed, and his face doing the thing where it did not change, but the quality of the not changing was unmistakably joyful. Sable was there too, the young Ironmoor guard with the scar from ear to jaw. He had been found during the liberation of the Ironmoor dungeon, having refused reassignment after Elara's removal. He had been demoted, confined to the lower levels as punishment for smuggling eggs to a prisoner. When the Valdris forces had secured the keep, they had found him in a storage room, sitting on a crate, waiting. He had not spoken much since arriving at Valdris. He stood now at the edge of the courtyard with a plate of food he was not eating, watching the ceremony with an expression that was not quite relief and not quite grief, but something between the two. The face of someone who had done one small right thing in a system built for wrong ones, and was still not sure it was enough. Elara found him after the ceremony. She was still in the white dress, still glowing faintly still, carrying the warmth of the bond like a coal in her chest. She stood in front of him, and he looked at her, and his eyes were bright. "Thank you for the eggs," she said. He blinked. His jaw worked. He looked at the plate in his hands. "It was just an egg," he said. His voice was rough. "Young." She took the plate from him and set it on the wall. Then she hugged him, which he was clearly not expecting, because he stood rigid for 3 full seconds before his arms came up, and he hugged her back with the desperate grip of someone who had not been touched with kindness in a very long time. "It was not just an egg," she said against his shoulder. "It was the reason I knew people were still human." He made a sound. Small. Broken. The sound of a guard who had slid a boiled egg through a cell door slot and had not known it was keeping someone alive. Kyle watched from across the courtyard. His wolf was settled. Calm. Whole in a way it had never been. The evening came down soft and gold over Valdris Keep. The courtyard lanterns were lit. The oak tree cast its shadow long and dark across the old foundation stones. Somewhere inside the kitchen was producing an unreasonable quantity of food, because Seren had calculated Elara's caloric needs for the 3rd trimester and had communicated them to the head cook with the intensity of a military briefing. Elara stood at the window of the room that was now theirs. The glass was the same old, hand-blown, rippled glass that Kyle had pressed his finger against on the night his wolf had first pointed south. She placed her palm flat against it. Silver light bloomed beneath her skin, refracting through the imperfections in the glass, throwing small rainbows across the opposite wall. The baby kicked. She smiled. Not the almost smile, the real one, full and specific and earned. Behind her, Kyle leaned in the doorway. He had changed out of his ceremony clothes into a plain shirt, and his hair was disheveled, and the scar on his jaw was pale in the lantern light. He watched her with an expression that contained no performance, no posture, no throne. She did not turn around. She did not need to. She could feel him through the bond, steady and warm a presence, as reliable as gravity. She said. The baby moved again. He crossed the room. He stood behind her and placed both hands on her belly, his palms flat. His fingers spread. The kick came again, strong, insistent, a small person announcing themselves to the world. Stubborn, she said. Runs in both families, he said. She leaned back against his chest. The silver light in her palm dimmed. The rainbows on the wall faded. The window showed them their reflection, two figures pressed together, the outline of a third between them. Outside, the first stars were appearing above the tree line. The oak tree creaked in the evening wind. A wolf howled somewhere in the distance, a single note that hung in the air, and then was answered, and then was answered again, until the night was full of voices, calling and responding, in the ancient wordless language of creatures who had found each other in the dark. Elara pressed her cheek against the glass. It was cold. The condensation fogged around her face, then cleared where her skin warmed it, leaving a perfect impression. She closed her eyes. The baby kicked once more, then settled. The window held their shapes long after they had gone to bed, two silhouettes preserved in breath and condensation, slowly fading as the glass cooled and the night deepened until all that remained was the faintest outline, a smudge of warmth on cold glass, dissolving into nothing, into everything, into the ordinary silence of a home.